Hey, thanks for tuning into the Zelos Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, Steve Myrland is with me. Now, Steve's been with the San Jose Sharks, University of Wisconsin. He is even an advisory board member with the Game Network and Vern Gambetta. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff like that, and we're going to jump right into the middle of our conversation. But before that, do check out my website, rockysnyder.com. Got some new online courses happening and more in 2026. You can get CEUs, but there's also podcast archives, blogs, and a whole bunch more. And don't forget, I've got a little book out there called Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. This episode of the Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere, with just an iPad or an iPhone, and no wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ's markerless motion capture in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, analyzing posture and gait mechanics, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit them at kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. You know, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Metabolic Elite be one of the sponsors of the Zelos Podcast. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. I've seen a lot of supplements and performance enhancement things over the years, but they pair clinical experience with innovation, like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption, like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. So learn more at metabolicelite.co. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click that subscribe button, tell a couple friends, and enjoy the conversation. And I've been looking forward to really having just a sit-down conversation with you. I don't necessarily have an agenda other than to get to know you, your career path, explore, gain, and, Vern, I adore Vern. I think he is perfectly outspoken. And when I mean, like, he does not mince words. He tells everybody exactly his position, and I respect that. I've had him on the podcast. He was one of my very first guests when I started this about 5 years ago. And to this day, I treasure that conversation that I had with him. And
I
so there.
I can't estimate where I would be or what I would be if I hadn't come across Vern, and it was pretty serendipitous. But I was at his first Building and Rebuilding the Complete Athlete seminar in 1992.
Ah,
There were a lot of people there. I mean, there were some. Rick Hughley from Washington was there, I think, and Rob Rogers was there, and
uh-huh.
Mike Boyle was there. These are people that I later came to know, and we were all sitting there, and I always tell the story. I went there with a really awful attitude. I went there thinking I was good at my job because I had a good job. So at the time I was a performance coach at the University of Wisconsin, and this was back when that was a fairly new thing. And I'm lucky it was a new thing, because the hiring standards for strength and conditioning coaches back then were like, we don't know what we're looking for, but other schools are having these guys, so we better get one. So I was hired. And I remember thinking on my first day, as I stared at the women's basketball team and they stared at me, I remember thinking, okay, you're a fraud. You do not deserve this job. You have no idea what's going to happen next. And so I decided I better start faking it, because you don't want to let on. And I must have faked it well enough that 4 years later, when I went to the seminar, I went there actually thinking I was, like I said, I deserved the job. And there was a workbook on the table that was about an inch thick. And I started leafing through it. And I started thinking, wow, is this part of my job? I mean, am I supposed to know all this stuff? If you think about it, Rocky, if my business card said strength and conditioning coach. Well, strength and conditioning are two of the easiest things that you can create, as long as you don't have to connect them to athletic qualities. I mean, those are basically just quantifiable things, and quantifiable things don't really give you an accurate picture of what a real athlete is. Like I've said this before, you have to be strong to be athletic, but you can be strong without being athletic. I mean, you can't be an athlete without being strong, but you can be strong without being athletic, is the way I put it. And so when you connect the things that I was focused on as a novice coach, when you try to connect them to speed and power and agility and coordination and sports skills and all that stuff, that's where you get into the weeds, and that's where these things start to be, on the more like art than science in a way. And I've always loved that spot, but it took Vern's first seminar to convince me, well, to point out to me that I don't even know what I don't know, but to his credit, I decided, well, he's going to see me again. And he was very generous with me and very, very patient. And he became the influence and the mentor that I needed.
I know when this past summer we met for the first time in June, I believe it was,
Yeah.
in Chicago at Perform Better, and Chris Boyer introduced us together, and instantly there, I just, you meet people and there's a connection. There's
Yeah.
there's commonalities, and so I just smile as you're telling this story, because talk about commonalities. So I 92 was when I began my professional journey in this field. 93 took the CSCS exam. 94 the personal training exam through the NSCA, and continually went to annual conference after annual conference. And then somewhere in the late 90s, after doing it now for, 7, 8, getting close to a decade, which which is a dangerous place for my ego to reside, I felt like I'm the top in my club. I'm the top in the training department. People are coming because of what I'm offering and the effects that I'm getting. So, I figured, like, I must be good at my job because I've got a good job, like you say. And then a few years later, a trainer came in who was a little older than myself, and he told me about this conference in Southern California that we should go to. And it was called the Perform Better Training Summit, or Functional Summit. And
Yeah.
it had been, at that time, I had already written, I think, 3 books on strength conditioning for adventure sports. And that was the way I was earning my continuing education units, was by being a published author. It wasn't through continuing to learn, because my ego got in the way of that. And then I went to that Perform Better Summit, and who's on stage but Vern Gambetta and a whole bunch of other names that some of them are still there and they're legendary. And after those 3 days, I think I've done a pretty good job since then trying to keep my ego in my back pocket and keeping it stuffed underneath my wallet or whatever's back there.
It's wise. Yeah.
It's just realizing how much I don't know. And and the things that you just said, like, could be on bumper stickers or t-shirts. For the matter of, like, strength and conditioning is easy as long as you don't have to connect it to athletic quality. Like, boom, that should be somewhere as a meme on one of these Instagram reels. I love that. So let's back up if you don't mind. I would love to know because you've you've probably got 1 or 2 years on me, not too many more, you know. But
Oh, I'd be surprised. I think I got a lot on you.
where did it all begin? Where did you start?
You know, as an undergrad, I at the University of Wisconsin, I was working at the indoor track, which they have subsequently knocked down to build a football palace. Our track team has no place to train.
Oh,
Yeah, but there was a little weight room in there, and it was literally just a segregated space, segregated by chicken wire that they stretched over it, and so you had to go through a door. And so I worked there. This is back in the 70s, and I uh, I trained, and eventually I was training in the athletic department weight room because I knew a lot of the people there, and was adjacent to the football stadium. And they had a weight room up on the second floor above the ticket office, which, by the way, is bad planning because when people drop the deadlift, the plaster was falling down. But I got into lifting weights, and I got into that room, and they eventually built a newer version of that weight room down on the ground floor. And at the time, I mean, this is sort of like a Horatio Alger story, but I was a truck driver at the time. I mean, that's what I was doing. I was driving a semi, and
mm,
I occasionally did the local Madison route. And one of my stops was at the Career Advising and Placement Office. And I knew a woman there. Her name was May, and she was always good to me. And I would go in there and deliver paper. And back in the day, that we were delivering computer paper by the box full, because that's what everybody was. And I would stop and look at the local listings of job opportunities at the University of Wisconsin, and I saw strength and conditioning coach, and I knew everybody over there. And I went over, I parked the semi in lot 18, blocking everybody. And I went upstairs and I talked to one of the athletic directors who I knew was going to be in charge of the hire. And I said, is this a legitimate listing, or do you already have, because they do that, or they have somebody in their pocket, but they have to post the listing. And they said, no, it's legitimate. And so I spoke to a bunch of the coaches that knew me and knew me through seeing me in the weight room and all of that. And I asked them if they'd consider being references for me. And several of them did that. And I got an interview. And the strength of my position was that for this particular weight room, I've been in it, I've trained in it, I've cleaned it, I've reorganized it because I've always helped whenever, and I know the athletes and I know the coaches. And I said, I'm sure you can find somebody with better academic credentials than me for this job, but to actually succeed here, I'm the one. And they bought it. And to be honest with you, they really needed to hire a woman at that point in time. I mean,
right.
we had lots of women's sports, and they were getting short shrift, and I really believe that women needed to be brought into the strength and conditioning profession a lot earlier than they have been, and to a greater extent than they currently are. But I got the job, like I said, I was pretty excited about it until I saw the women's basketball team at 7 o'clock in the morning that day. And I realized you better figure out something to do here in a hurry. But, and again, so that's how it started. And I had to be NSCA certified, and they paid my way out to Denver in 1988, I think it was. And I was confident about the practical application side of that test, but I didn't have a real grounding in actin myosin transport and the science of, so I really had to, I went to the symposium that for 2 days, and I studied really hard. I did really well on the test, and ironically, nobody at the University of Wisconsin ever asked me if I passed. To this day, they don't, so, but yeah, and therein after that, again, I had the seminar in 1992 in Chicago with Vern. And then subsequently, I did a bunch of the Perform Better, Learn by Doing seminars with him. I remember we were there in Boston over St. Patrick's Day at the Reggie Lewis Center for 2 days in a row, big crowds of people. And I really enjoyed that. My hat's off to MF for putting those on, because it really gives people a chance to, and as you know, to really try things out and see how these things can be used. And I thought it was a really user-friendly idea for bringing people together. And I met a lot of people through that. And I mean, like you said, I just went down to talk to Chris that day last June, and I ended up getting to meet you and find out that friends of mine, Mike Potenza and others. And so that was all really exciting. Yeah. Well, and after that, I was offered a position with the San Jose Sharks, and the first thing I did was I wanted to go back to Vern's seminar, because the first one just kind of blew my mind. And I've seen this happen subsequently, because I've seen it happen to young coaches who come to Gain for the first time, and they try to absorb all this information, and they try to get, and it's so radically different from what they were used to. And I mean, I've seen people just break down and cry, and I get it. I probably should have done the same thing myself, but I wanted to just go back and go at it with a better attitude and be more prepared to learn. And that's a tip of the hat to Vern for that, because one of the things that I was convinced of in that first seminar was, and this has been a speaking point of my own, when you're looking at somebody in the front of the room, there are two kinds of presenters. They're the people who really want you to know what they know. And then there are the people who really want you to be impressed by what they know. And I think those people tend to kind of obfuscate, and they tend to use $64 terms when $2 terms are perfectly reasonable. And the thing that I saw from Vern that first seminar was he was working hard to help us absorb all of this stuff. And it wasn't about, don't you wish you were as smart as I am? I mean, it wasn't that at all. So, I just wanted to go back and to go at it with a more open mind. And I couldn't find anything about another seminar. And I finally I called him. I spoke to his wife, Melissa, and this was when Vern was with the White Sox down in Sarasota. And she said, well, he's at the training facility, just call him there. And I said, well, I was pretty nervous, but he remembered me. And I told him what I was going to do with the job with the Sharks, and that I really wanted to get better grounding to tackle that. And he said, well, it's funny because his line kind of parallels yours. He said, the one thing I found out about giving seminars is that you're always teaching and you're no longer learning. And so he said, I'm taking a break from that now to go and see other coaches and hear what they have to say, so that his, and that was I never forgot that either. He was coming out to Santa Clara when I was going to be early on with the Sharks, and he said, let's have lunch. So we
Yeah,
did.
now he's got his grandkids are in the Bay Area, so I'm surprised. Well, you're not there anymore, right? You're in Wisconsin,
Right,
so
right. But he didn't have him. I mean, I met his kids when they were the age of grandkids. Kristen and Kurt. Yeah, I've known them for a long time. But yeah, so he was speaking to the National Soccer Coaches Convention, I think, and he was out there. And so we had lunch, and man, it was great. I was talking and I was learning, and of course lunch has to end. And I just said, boy, I really I just need to spend more time on listening to you talk. And he invited me to come down to spring training that spring. And the Sharks were prepared to send me to, continuing education things. And so I remember I think we played in Calgary. And then I flew from Calgary to Sarasota, and and I yeah, and I think I stayed in Tampa and drove down every day to this White Sox spring training. They were down on Euclid Avenue, as I recall, in Sarasota. And this was the year that Michael Jordan was playing baseball.
ah,
And Carlton Fisk was one of the White Sox. I mean, it was a pretty
whoa,
heady time, And so I'd get there early in the morning, and Vern and I would do a circuit. And actually the only other person in camp at the time that we were training was Michael, because he was over there shoveling baseballs into a pitching machine and taking an extra hour and a half of batting practice, and which impressed me, by the way. But I was there for a week, and I had completed my off-season training program for the Sharks. I took this job on a 1-year leave of absence from the University of Wisconsin because I didn't really want to leave. I wasn't really all that attracted to the whole professional sport thing. I know it's supposed to be the zenith of what we aspire to, but I really liked working with all the teams. I liked working with tennis and soccer and track and field and rowing. I liked the variety, and I think the variety helped make me a more well-rounded coach.
certainly.
And so I was pretty sure that I was going to go back, and for that reason, the off-season program that I was going to write for the Sharks was kind of like writing a resume, So I had written my whole thing, and I had this vision of going down to Sarasota and showing it to Vern, and having him pat me on the shoulder and say, "This is brilliant, way to go." I never showed it to him. In fact, I'm pretty sure I could take you to the trash can in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport where I just unceremoniously dumped the whole thing on the way home, because in 1 week of seeing how he was organizing things and how he worked things out in Sarasota with the White Sox. And by the way, one of the things that hooked me at that first seminar with Vern was, he said, I'm currently working with a baseball team. He said, but at heart, I'm a track and field coach. And I believe, and if you were wondering, well, how does that qualify you to work with baseball players? I really believe that when you factor sport down to its basic elements, pretty soon you're going to get to running, jumping, throwing. You're going to get to track and field, or as it's known everywhere else in the world, the sport of athletics. And that was liberating for me, because it simplified things. It made it really clear. What we want to do is create better athletes. And I kind of redefined my whole approach at Wisconsin and in San Jose was, all right, I might not be able to create a better tennis player because I don't understand the ins and outs of actually teaching ground strokes and serves and all that. But if I can give the coaches a better athlete, if they have any, skill in coaching, they should be able to make a better tennis player or soccer player or discus thrower or whatever out of this
Certainly.
better raw material. And in the process, I realized that when you help somebody become a better athlete, you're also sort of bulletproofing them against injury. And that was really neat because it meant that you didn't have to do something special to prevent injury. You just had to chase the goal of athleticism. And that was really what Vern was about. He said right early on in that first day, he talked about you want to train to play rather than play to train. You want to warm up to play rather than play to warm up. And one of the biggest things was, he said, you want to train movement, not muscles. And that was the big liberator for me, because if you do focus on strength, you tend to focus on hypertrophy and it almost becomes bodybuilding where you're isolating individual muscles. And what Vern was teaching us was, no, we got to integrate those things. You know how I don't know if they still teach it this way in physical therapy, but they always talked about agonist-antagonist relationships with muscles.
And not synergists.
Exactly. They're synergists. I mean, muscles, if you think about a swimmer in streamlined position and you realize that she got into that position using her muscles, and the only thing muscles can actively do is shorten. So how do we account for that? It's might as well call it magic.
Right.
And on some level it is. There was a physical therapy book by Bosmajian called Muscles Alive, where he pointed out that, I have it somewhere here. He pointed out that kinesiology is really a dead science because kinesiologists spend their time looking at cadavers and going, oh, I see. Well, when this shortens, this happens. Well, yeah, in theory, but we all are all the sum total of what we've done and what we haven't done and what's happened to us and what hasn't happened to us. And so I can tell you for my right shoulder, which is, probably should have been replaced a long time ago, too much boxing and bench press. When I want to reach up to a high shelf, I tend to initiate that by shoving my right shoulder up to my ear and then kind of flinging that arm up there. So that isn't really how I do things. And so we all are unique, and so chasing athleticism is the best way of working with and around all of that uniqueness that we bring to the things that we do. And so yeah, I that first seminar and then taking those base statements as well, they've become guiding lights for me ever since. And that's why I just can't imagine what my life would have been like if I hadn't been at that first seminar.
Right. This seems like a good place to pause a moment so we can hear from our sponsors. The Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere with just an iPad or iPhone. No wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. At the forefront of metabolic elite is Jim Lavelle, internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, a chief science officer at Lifetime, and the co-chair for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He's got over 4 decades of experience and has guided Olympic athletes, professional teams, and leading health institutions. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. Like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, and trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. You know, you were talking about track and field and Vern, and then how that carries over to other sports. If we reverse engineer it, I would love to share the story with you. My ninth grade English teacher at Reading Memorial High School in Reading, Massachusetts. His name's Harold Croft. He passed away, but Hal Croft, he was the coach for the girls and boys spring track and field team for Reading Memorial High School. They're coming out with a movie about his life. He was a Vietnam veteran, came back, and began as an English teacher at my high school. And what's really remarkable was that he is the most winningest coach in high school track and field, I believe, in the nation. We live in Middlesex County. It's comprised of many, many towns, but I think it was either 13 or 14 consecutive years that the Reading High boys and girls track and field teams were county champions, and many of those were state championships. But he went on a run for over a decade. And here's how he did it, Steve, was that he looked at the other sports and he said, you know, like he came up to me, for instance, and I think it was my senior year. I was a competitive gymnast, and my specialty was the horizontal or the high bar. And he said, you have no trouble being upside down. In fact, you really like being on your hands or flipping around. I want you to come out and do pole vaulting. So what he did was he saw the basic elements of what each event was,
Right.
and he went out to those athletes in different sports and recruited them for spring track and field. And so, you know, it's just kind of like what you were saying, only in the opposite direction. Like the fundamentals of human movement can be found in track and field. And those are the basics for athletic prowess and athletic pursuit and just about anything you can think of. So I totally get it.
My late father-in-law my wife she was a college gymnast. She was a scholarship gymnast here at University of Wisconsin. And her father was captain of the UW gymnastics team. Now, when he was a child, he had polio. He still, I mean, to his death, he had deficiencies so he was down at the University of Wisconsin he never participated actively in the sports that were offered in his high school because he couldn't run, but he was always fit and he was always athletic, and he came down here. He went to take his freshman physical education exam. It was pull-ups, and the teacher that we had some really great legendary physical educators here at the University of Wisconsin. I realized, well, he went, Dean Morey was the name of the teacher, and he was also the gymnastics coach. And he had my father-in-law jump up to the pull-up bar to do pull-up test. And I think he'd still be going. And he jumped down, and Dean Morey said, son, I want you to come out for gymnastics. He says, I've never done gymnastics. He goes, that doesn't matter. You got what I need. And so this was and he ended up being the captain of the UW gymnastics team. And,
Nice.
and, and that's just proof positive of what we're saying, that give me a good athlete and I can make that good athlete into a pole vaulter or, a shot putter. I mean, just give me an athlete. And that simplistically or not, that is how I've viewed my job ever since. I want to give coaches good athletes.
And I love that you bring up the movement over muscle. I think that in our industry, we are still we kind of fall back into the muscle and forget about the movement often. I'll bring up a topic that I've almost probably since ad nauseum, but the the tendency in our industry to blame one muscle for the breakdown of movement is just ridiculous. Like we used like you can think back when we were in the 90s, it was going to be the abdominals. And then at one point it was the
Transverse
transverse
abdominis.
abdominis,
Yeah,
exactly the
yeah.
TVA. Right. And then it became the psoas. And at one point in time it was the multifidus and or some other muscles that are integrated along the spine. And then from the psoas we had, it could have been the piriformis,
Well,
and
and then
lately
it
it's
was the
the glute
order in which
medius.
they fired. In other words, before you
Yes.
before you before you bent down to pick up a piece of paper, you had to, first of all, you had to activate your transverse abdominis before the multifidus. And so here you are. I mean, I couldn't spell those things, much less find them on and and we got into I don't know if you were part of the the great drawing in maneuver
Oh
part.
yeah, blood pressure cuff underneath the lower
Yeah,
back and
yeah,
all that
yeah.
stuff,
I
right?
mean, all of that. And, again, it just common sense sort of suggested to me a long time ago that, well, that's just not how bodies work. That like Bosmajian pointed out in that book, human movement may as well be defined as magic, because all of us move differently, and we move differently for different reasons, and because of different circumstances and all of that. But we are all trying to solve the movement puzzle. And that's I talk about movement puzzles all the time. That's I pose these riddles to bodies, and then I see how they solve them. And it's fascinating to watch people approach a new movement skill, or task. And it's really fun to do that in a group where we're all like, we're okay, we're going to watch Rocky. Let's see how Rocky does it. Okay, that was pretty good. Let's see how Steve does it. I don't know why, but that didn't look so good. So what was Rocky doing that Steve isn't, and then, I mean, it's been a lot of fun getting athletes who are demonstrating some skills to sort of break that down in their own mind and in their own kinesthetic awareness, and see if they can help somebody who's not quite there yet. That's always been a great fun thing to do as well. Um, but focusing on movement is liberating, because it
So
gives, one thing,
liberating.
it lets you get out of the weight room, and it lets you get out of looking at the world through the hole in an Olympic plate, which really sets you free. It lets you use equipment that is much more universal and far less restrictive. Um,
I know this. I know I'm going to be stealing a whole bunch of phrases and replaying this conversation because I love looking at the world
well,
through
I'm
the
sure
hole
I'm
of a weight
stealing
plate,
them from
Olympic weight
everybody.
plate. Oh my gosh, that is fantastic. If not to get on a rant or a pedestal in any way, but we're boiling down human movement, we might as well boil it down to the two essences as I've learned it from others, is that when we land on the planet, when our body hits planet Earth, there is this whole kind of orchestration, this dance that every joint must go through, ideally it should, and therefore all the tissue that surrounds those articulations are going to have to behave in a certain way, and that gets the nervous system and intertwined with the muscular and the skeletal, and it's just this amazing kind of symphony. And then, okay, so there's that basic ultimate human movement landing on the planet, and then we have blasting off the planet, which is the exact polar opposite. So, what if, I know it's a crazy thought, what if we just looked at what should be happening in each of those two polar opposite events and talk about bringing sports down to the basics of track and field where you have movement like that? What about taking anything and boiling it down to those basic movements? And you said yourself, find out what's missing. Like, why is he looking cleaner than him or her? What is missing in their library of movements? I mean, if we start to have that filter or that lens of looking at human movement, I think we're going to be that much more effective, especially if we kind of peel back the muscles and we get out of the weight room and thinking that's the end all be all. Okay,
Well,
I guess
that's
I'm on a soapbox. I didn't mean to be, but
no,
there you
but
go.
that's in fact, that's what really, when I met you and I looked at your product, I thought it really comes down, number one, to how you how you connect to the planet, how you organize your foot on the earth. Um, and 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 the other thing is that we, in our business, we always talk about the kinetic chain, but we never really appreciate the way a chain functions. You know, that, as you say, well, the way I always say it, when my product was the ABC ladder, and I used to tell people that remember, when you hit the ground hits you back, and the ground does not lose that battle. So you got to try to make sure that you don't lose it either. And so you can hit the ground like a ton of bricks, or you can hit the ground like a butterfly landing on a leaf. And when we talk about the kinetic chain, I like to use a chain when I demonstrate this. So all these links are connected, and movement happens when each of them contributes segmentally to those movements. If there are a bunch of links that are not tensioned or immobilized, I mean, I think my sense of things is that one of the consequences of our computerized age, where we've been sitting around with computer mouses and a lot of, so many people, so many young athletes even now are kind of paralyzed mid-thoracic. I mean, T-spines are not working. They're not functioning together. They're kind of rusted. And
Mhm.
consequently, you have shoulder problems, and you've got all kinds of problems in cervical spines and stuff. And so the way I say it is that if you're twisting, and 3 or 4 of the links up there in that chain that is your spinal cord are not mobile, then all of that action has to happen somewhere, and you're going to get it. But you're going to get it from the nearest proximal mobile links, except they weren't designed to do all of that. They were designed to play their part. And so, and maybe an easier way to say it is that it's hard to push a chain. A chain requires tension. A chain has no function until it is properly tensioned. And so your point about the foot hitting the floor, I used to work for the local school district, and in high school track and field in Wisconsin anyway, track and field season starts indoors in hallways because there's a lot of snow and ice and mud and all that other stuff. And so you've got a lot of kids that, a lot of them haven't done much all winter long if they weren't on basketball teams or something. So now they're getting overwhelmed by ground contact and ground impact forces on hard surfaces with lousy shoes. And the upshot is that by the second week of spring track and field season, half the track team is sitting around outside the training room with ice packs on either shin, both sides. And I see that, and I have described that, I see that as a hip problem. In other words, what I see is happening is that the foot hits the ground and there's impact that goes up the chain. And that impact is transferred up into the acetabulum, but the femur doing this. And if the hip is not strengthened to the point where it can properly co-contract at the precise moment of impact to sort of attenuate that impact force, then this is going to be ricocheting back down the chain. And so down there in that, very vulnerable area on the medial shin, you've got these impacts from above and below kind of meeting and competing. So I feel like that the way we want to deal with this is to teach that chain how to contract so that there's proper tension up here, and then also teach the foot to strike the ground assertively rather than passively, and thereby using the tension on the chain to protect the weaker links up and down.
I love it. I see it also in a very similar fashion. I use Goldilocks as my analogy, I guess, because not too hard, not too soft, but somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Like every articulation, every bony structure has a role to play in the activity that you just described. And if there is less motion, like you say at the hip, then neighboring articulations like the lumbars or the knee are going to have to, they're going to be encouraged, at least not have to, but they're going to be encouraged to increase their role.
Yes.
And then that's going to lead to irritation in all three areas. One area not moving enough will get stagnant and get inflamed potentially. And then you're talking about labral issues or bursitis or whatever. And then meanwhile, you might get discs shifting in places that will create issues in the lumbars, but then you might get tendinopathy or patellar tendonitis in the knee. Like all of these symptoms are just the fact that something's not moving enough, something's moving too much. Can we get them into a more balanced place where the kinetic activity, the kinematic sequencing is as close to optimal as possible so they have less likelihood of injury, wear, tear, and so on. And it's remarkable. You bring up puzzles. It's so funny because if somebody asks me at a cocktail party or whatever what I do for a living, I either say I'm a disruptor or a puzzle master. That's these days, that's what I say, because I want to disrupt existing patterns that I see in people and offer new patterns that might be more efficient so that their nervous system attaches to that a bit more because it doesn't want to waste excess energy. But at the same time, the human body is the most amazing puzzle, I believe, on this planet. And to the point where it's almost seeming like magic. And if you can understand where the pieces fit and how they move and lock and place and so on, you'll find that, that puzzle piece down or at the finger has actually a tremendous amount to do with the T-spine, or that fractured thumb you got 10 years ago greatly affects the C-spine or the lumbars or the opposing hip. It's like it's all connected. So it may be in the neighboring articulation, but if you follow the breadcrumbs around, you may very well get to a place you had no idea the underlying problem lies.
And that's why the old approach to, I think, sports med, and I love PTs and ATCs. I love the fact that they have to fix the things we break, and that's why I think they've always been at the forefront of. But I think in the old days it was pretty simplistic. If you went there and you said, "Well, my back hurts," they would lay you down on the training table and look at your back.
Yeah.
I think probably you can appreciate the fact that maybe the problem starts down at the sole of your foot and how you are self-organizing every time it strikes the ground.
Yeah.
And so we
Could have
have
been
to,
that side impact you had on the playing field, and somebody nailed your shoulder, and you got some compression there, and now you're trying to protect that, and that's causing mass management to go a little differently, and now your hip or your lower back's bugging you.
I've always, again, this is one of my rules that I live by, but I decided really right after the seminar that I saw Vern, what we really want are bodies that are wholly adaptable rather than completely adapted. And I
Yeah.
realized that when I was at Wisconsin, initially, everything I was doing was creating bodies that were really adapted to things that didn't adapt well to what they were going to have to do in competitive environments. I mean, so there has to be some transferability of the training to the actual activity. And there again, that's why working with multi-sports was genuinely beneficial and formative for me. I had a conversation last week with two coaches, two people who work with U.S. skiing. Andrew Libbs was one, and Brian Neff was the other. Brian works with para skiers, and I so wanted to talk to him because my limited experience in working with like wheelchair athletes, sit skiers or whatever, was that there you finally fully appreciate the uniqueness of the individual athlete. And I had a great friend and mentor named Roger Ishins, who my very first rule of thumb for what I do is it's always about difference. Roger gave me that one. I was working with a whole bunch of female rowers, and I was going to work on core strength. And I was telling him what I was going to do, and he said two things. He said, well, remember that it's always about difference. In other words, you got 75 rowers in the room, so one size has to fit all, but it never does. It never, ever does. And the other thing he said was, remember, Stephen, he used to call me Stephen, like my mom, when she was mad at me. He said, remember, Stephen, not every movement that requires core strength will create it. And I immediately
Love it.
I thought of a picture. In fact, I use this as a slide in that presentation about rules I live by, but I've got a picture of Nolan Ryan. A lot of people probably don't remember Nolan Ryan, but we do. Nolan Ryan fully loaded, and you knew he was going to deliver the Ryan Express. It was going to be 104 miles an hour. And you could say, and I think we all could agree, it takes great core strength to do that. But if you think you're going to create that core strength by going out there and throwing your arm off every day, you're going to destroy all these smaller structures, all these weaker links in the chain, long before you create this bulwark of core strength. And
I love that, because you just also, I immediately thought of baseball players when you say athletes are adapted to their position or their sport rather than being adaptable. And I think that feeds right into it. Just because you do a specific action and get adapted to it doesn't mean necessarily that you're adapting properly. Your movement mechanics are now actually more reinforced to bring about a greater degree of wear, tear,
and
and so on.
if you adapt specifically to the sport, as you must, you have to be aware that you may be also adapting or being unable to adapt to things that may happen along the way. I mean, the sport that I always think of when I talk about this adapted versus adaptable is rowing. Because if you're a college rower, fun athletes to work with. But if you're a starboard rower, you're going to make the same movement 1 billion times. And remember,
Yes.
this is you're sitting, your feet are anchored, tied into the stretchers in the boat. And you talk about the kinetic chain. Well, this is the kinetic chain writ large, because you've got this honking big long oar out here that's going to grab the water. And now all of those forces magnified all across the chain. You're going to rotate to your right side as you put the oar in the water at the catch, and then you got to drive through and finish. Well, you do that as many times as you're going to do that over the course of 4 or 5 years in collegiate rowing. And people are going to look at you and wonder, well,
Why is he Quasimodo?
Yeah, exactly. Because muscles and joints respond to the demands we make on them, and they don't make. So my goal with the rowers early on was, how do I build back some adaptability rather than all of that hyper adaptedness that they get from repetitive movement sports with that much resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's intense. I mean, a 2,000 meter race will last anywhere from 5.5 to 7 minutes, but those are really unpleasant minutes. I mean, those are minutes where you wish you were any place else but where you are, and because it's so intense. And that kind of intensity and that kind of volume can do tremendous damage to bodies, and bodies adapt. The neuroplasticity element of all of this is really worth mentioning too, because
Oh, yes.
it can be your best friend, but it can be an enemy. I mean, if you sprain your ankle, the PTs used to say it took 20,000 perfect reps to repattern a movement. Well, sprain your ankle and you've got a new movement pattern, most gauche. I mean, right then and there, it's called limping. And you realize, okay, if I did the standard rollout it hurts when I'm walking straight ahead. It hurts to go into plantar dorsiflexion. But if I walk sideways, it doesn't hurt so much. And so if I want to walk from here to there, I'll probably turn this injured foot out.
Right.
And now I'm walking forward with this sort of
new movement patterns.
And after 6 or 7 weeks of doing that, while the pain and the swelling are dissipating, there's not a stimulus as strong as that pain was to get me to remember, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. So now
no reset buttons.
Yeah, and I probably will carry a little of that external rotation forward. And now what is that going to do to my knee and this knee over here maybe, and then the opposite hip? I've noticed always how injuries have this way of kind of zigzagging their way up the body.
Yes.
Where an ankle injury here can be a knee problem here and then result in a hip problem there and even a neck problem. So
I think it's the greatest insult to the human frame is an inversion sprain, because it's not looked at as something that is all that significant. But when you put it into that type of consideration, you'll realize that it leads to so many other non-contact injuries in the sports world and in the regular world.
Bill Knowles, who's a good friend and an incredible practitioner, as you know. I mean, he talks about orthopedic injuries as neural insults.
There you go.
And almost, I mean, borderline traumatic brain injury, because it changes the way you move. It changes, and all of a sudden your basic building blocks of movement, gait and, arm action, like they're all fundamentally changed. I remember working with a kid in a summer camp, and we were working on acceleration, and the kid would carry his, I've got to stand up to show you. This arm was swinging and this arm was here. And
so he wasn't able to load onto that side that his arm swing wasn't occurring.
And I went up to him and I smiled and I said, "Tell me when you broke that arm." And he said, "Well, how'd you know about that?" And I said, "Well, when did it happen?" He said, "Well, I was 9. Now he's 14 now." And he said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Because you're carrying that arm like it's still in a cast, because that's the way you moved for all those weeks while those bones were knitting and you were wearing that cast. You have not gone back to the liberating feeling of swinging that arm before it was injured. And those are the kinds of things that just reinforce this idea that it is a kinetic chain, and that when links are damaged or weakened or whatever, other links are going to pay a price for that. And
Steve, oh my gosh, I could keep on going with this with you because we're of similar minds, and the experiences that we've seen, it's not a one-off. These are things that we see all the time. It's incredible, and what's equally incredible is the time that we've been chatting here. It just flows by. So, what I would love to do, if you're open to it, is I'd love to continue like volume 2 of this conversation somewhere in the very near future, because we didn't even tap into the neuroplasticity aspect, the motor neurology, the overall governing body. But
we haven't even spoken about fascia.
Right. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, we'll get very fashionable about that, I'm sure. No pun intended. But yeah, for sure. Steve, I knew this was going to be a great conversation. Just the moment I met you, I figured, oh, we're going to have some good talks in the future.
I was nervous, Rocky, because you didn't tell me what we're going to talk about. And I thought, well, I hope I can hold up my end. All right.
Oh boy, did you hold it up and then some. So, hey, thank you for coming on. And we're going to set up a time where we can do it again in the real near future.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you.
And well, that brings this episode of Zelos Podcast to a close. I want to thank Steve for coming on, and we're having him back again. I mean, the time just flew away, and we didn't even get into half the stuff we wanted to cover. But that's for another day. Remember to check out metabolicelite.co. Check out all the products they have on their website. Synapsin Pro is something I've been using to help stay focused without having to over-caffeinate myself. It keeps me in the zone so I can just really hone in on the things I need to achieve without feeling like, man, I gotta reach for an energy drink every 5 minutes. Metabolicelite.co. And don't forget, Kinetic IQ. They've got markerless motion capture for morons like me. I can use their product with my iPhone or my iPad. I can look at posture analysis, movement analysis of any exercise, gait analysis. It gives me everything I could possibly want when tracking people's movements. So, check out kinetikiq.com.